So I'm James, and I work at Microsoft. I've been a Xamarin developer. I was saying earlier, I'm going on, I think, 11 years because I changed my career. I used to write printer software for Canon. That was my job out of college, was writing printer software, and it was rad and it was awesome. It was super modular. It was crazy big architecture. It was a .NET 1.1 application that we migrated to 2.0 and then to 3.5. It was a huge WinForms application. Everything was component based. There were so many interfaces. It was really cool. And it was a great job out of college because we didn't have mobile phones yet. This is in 2007. I think Android phones and iOS was like really early on. And working for a company with just crazy architecture and it's just so big, I learned so much about what I should and shouldn't do in applications. And of course, I do tons of things that are wrong. But I think when I hear things like the modular approach or component-based approach, it really harkens back to, yeah, when I built really big enterprise software, those are the things that I did. And it's cool to see mobile progress at the same time. You know, doing mobile for 12 years at this point, 11 years at this point, it's been really interesting to watch things change, right? When we started doing Xamarin development, when I did 11 years ago, it was just like one form factor. It was like an Android phone with like 3 screen dimensions, and it was one iPhone that had 1 screen dimension. I know the biggest change at the time was going from 320 by 480 to a 320 by 540, just a little bit bigger. All you had to do is update a splash screen, and like that was it. It was just, and then everything got bigger, and it was amazing. And it's been crazy, right? If you think of this journey in 10 years, in a decade, we've gone from just phones to big tablets, to foldable devices, to putting things on televisions, to putting things on refrigerators with Samsung devices. It's just wild to just think about the journey that we've gone on. If you've been a long time Xamarin developer, Xamarin Forms developer, you know that not only is Xamarin and Xamarin Forms as frameworks gone on a journey as well, .NET has gone on a journey at the same time. I was talking to someone, you know, when I started doing Xamarin development and Xamarin Forms development, we're on like .NET Core 1. I remember when it came out and it was just like, what is happening? Like, this is, you know, what is going on? And we're going through this journey. And I sort of think of the journey of .NET MAUI similar to that journey of .NET Core, actually, into .NET 5, where it was a big change, where a lot of things were similar, but a lot of things were new. A lot of things in the ecosystem almost could be used, but a little bit of work needed to be done. And now we fast forward to the fact that we're in .NET 5, .NET 6, .NET 7, a new version of .NET is coming out every single year. The ecosystem around just .NET as a whole is just absolutely fantastic and really blooming. And I think in the world of .NET MAUI, that's what we're progressing to, right? Because coming into .NET 6 with .NET MAUI, you know, that was really the original release. And it didn't even happen at the time of .NET 6. It was kind of .NET 6.5 because it was really around May of this year. The tooling wasn't done. It's still kind of finalizing on the Mac. And I think with .NET 7, I almost feel like it's sort of a relaunch in a way of .NET MAUI, where Visual Studio will be finalized on Mac and PC. But additionally, a lot of the features that the team wanted to put in the original release, especially around desktop devices, are really coming in to the SDK itself. So I'm just going to cover what's new in .NET 7, answer a bunch of questions, do a bunch of demos. And the cool part about .NET 7 with .NET MAUI, it's actually not that much that's new, to be honest with you, which is good in a way, because how many of you are actually doing .NET MAUI work today? Besides just like, yeah, exactly, right? Because like we're all just getting ready for it. It just came out. And if you're a Xamarin developer, you're trying to maintain your app and then thinking about migrating. And I had a whole conversation about how I'm going to do my migrations because I haven't done them yet, and I'm preparing to do them. And it's not broke, it's working. No need to change anything. But there's a lot new that I'm excited for. So I kind of talked about this in general, which is sort of this unified approach. This is why I love being a .NET developer, is because I can build for anything, right? Whether I do want to do AKS clusters, ridiculous microservice-based stuff, I can do that on the cloud or on the web. I can build desktop apps, mobile apps, web apps. I can do AI, IoT, gaming, and anything like that, and use great tools from Microsoft or not from Microsoft. I work for Microsoft, so I have a bunch of Microsoft stuff. But obviously, I think what's cool about .NET is that there is a great ecosystem of component vendors and IDE creators and community members building great stuff. So use what you want to use in general. And then what's cool is that every year in November, I just update this number. So while it's .NET 6 today, that'll just be .NET 7, and you just change what number. I did a YouTube short of updating your .NET MAUI app to .NET 7, and it takes 5 seconds. So I guess it took me 60 seconds, but that's as much time as I have. So I think when we look at the world of client development, we think of desktop devices and mobile devices, whether it be tablets or phones. And we think of the importance that they've had on the world and will continue to have in the future, right? When you combine both just Windows devices and iOS and Android devices together, not including Macs, that's already over 5 billion devices that we as developers can reach. So that's why the team built .NET MAUI, is because the ecosystem of those devices have changed over the years, just like I talked about earlier. And so has the tooling, and so has the underlying runtime. So when we think about .NET MAUI, the team wanted to build a super productive way of building native applications for those different consumer devices, those desktop machines, those iOS and Android devices, and in different form factors. And they wanted to not only include the latest tooling, which is why it's in Visual Studio 2022, but also the latest runtime that brings in a lot of new features with it. So with .NET 6, right, before we even get to .NET 7, it really introduced a unification system. So if a lot of you haven't moved to .NET MAUI yet, you might be thinking, well, cool, .NET 7 is here, well, why do I even want to go forward? Well, just like .NET 5 unified .NET itself and brought in more things from .NET beyond .NET Core, .NET MAUI being based on top of .NET 6 and then .NET 7 and .NET 8, it's in the box. And I think that's really important. As a Xamarin developer, it was always kind of in the box. Like it was kind of a checkbox over here, and it kind of streamlined as we joined Microsoft. But actually being part of a workload of .NET itself means that everything is unified, from command line support, from the project system, to the base class library, to the type system. And it's thought about as one .NET. So that entire upper part of those boxes are all unified, which means when .NET updates, .NET MAUI updates, which means C# updates, there's no lagging part of that anymore. It's just part of the system. So that means you as a developer building with .NET MAUI have a reliable update cadence. You know exactly when the next version of .NET MAUI will ship. Every November. It'll always update every November with new features. And to me, that's really important. When you're a Xamarin partner, you're like, I don't know. I hope they update to do this thing. And it kind of varied because of just how the operating systems were updated. But I think the other focus in .NET MAUI is really on not only just mobile, which was really just the iOS and Android and then Xamarin Forms version, but really finalizing that world-class support for desktop and also hybrid scenarios as well with Blazor for if you're web developers. And then finally, I think with .NET MAUI inside of .NET 6 and 7 timeframe is really about that productive environment. So things that I love about it is the single project, also that it handles all of my images and fonts and assets for me automatically. But since it's built into this ecosystem of .NET, it means we get to take advantage of the extension framework with IOC and inversion of control, all the hot reload support for C# hot reloading, XAML hot reloading, and also a lot of the visual diagnostics that are coming in from Visual Studio itself. And you'll see even more of that stuff come in over the years as Visual Studio expands. The whole goal that the team has is to stop trying to do stuff separately. And I know because I work very close with the teams, and I knew how the XAML hot reload worked. I knew how it worked at Xamarin. I knew how it worked with Xamarin at Microsoft, and then I knew how it worked with WPF and UWP, and let's just say they weren't unified. And now they're very much unified because it's one kind of Microsoft working on this, right? And even though we were acquired 6 years ago, things take time for teams to adjust, right? So what's nice now with .NET MAUI is when we say it's a unified .NET, it's really a unified team and effort inside of our developer division more than ever to give developers this world-class experience for building these applications. I think the response to that is quite excellent. I think if I look just at the adoption of .NET as a whole, when we look at .NET 5 to .NET 6, it's almost nearly 2x developers in the same time, which is November to, I guess, August in this one, of developers using .NET 6. And I think that you'll continue to see this trend go, because even though each version of .NET is either a current release or an LTS release, the real goal of the development team is to ensure easy updatability of .NET. So going from .NET 5 to .NET 6 should be relatively seamless, whether it's a web API or a Blazor application. And the same should be true going from .NET 6 to .NET 7 for .NET MAUI developers. The goal, just like we've always had, and the goal of Miguel, the Miguelism of the day, was don't break people, and you're going to break APIs on occasion. The goal is don't break people. And I'll tell you this much, even though it may have seemed like things would break on occasion, I mean, in the heart and soul of everything that the Xamarin and .NET MAUI team and the .NET team do is really don't break people. Or if you do it, you better do it for a really, really good reason. And I think that's really why .NET MAUI came about, was it was a time to say, hey, listen, when Xamarin Forms was created, we didn't have half of the devices that we have today. And we're kind of shoehorning in, or kind of like shoving stuff in here, and it's not creating a better experience. So we need to rethink of the architecture. So not only are tons of developers just adopting newer versions of .NET, which is really fantastic for us as developers in the ecosystem, but obviously when we GA'd .NET MAUI, the usage from early previews into the general availability has just gone absolutely fantastic. And I think I see this not only in the response from people that were Xamarin developers that continue to be .NET developers building for iOS and Android and Windows, but I think there's a lot of people that tried Xamarin a long time ago, or just other .NET developers that now see .NET MAUI as actually part of .NET itself. And I guess it has .NET in the name, so it must be. That wasn't my plan. I had a different name for it in general, but we won't talk about that. There was many discussions of names in general. That there might have been more discussion of names than anything else, I would say, of it. But I think that this trend line will continue to go, and I hope it does, as people evaluate using .NET MAUI at their company or as an independent developer. Now, I think I also wanted to talk about this because I talked about that every November release date schedule, and I think this is an important part of why we're part of .NET itself. So every November there's a .NET conference, .NET Conf. Every November, it's free, it's online, it's virtual. We'll have one in November. It's 8th through the 10th. It's a 3-day event. And that's when we launch new versions of .NET, and usually a new version of Visual Studio. 17.4 will be the latest version that coincides with it. Now, what's cool here is that every single year, a new version of .NET MAUI will release. So .NET 8, 2023, .NET 9, 2024. It'll continue to go on forever. And this is very similar to like how Node.js and other frameworks work out there as well. Now, some of the different parts here is that technically .NET MAUI is this optional workload. So when you install .NET 7, you have to then install .NET MAUI as a workload, or just iOS or Android or Mac Catalyst. And that's nice because that means someone just installing .NET to build a web API or a command line application or a service worker or something like that, they don't have to bring in all the Android dependencies, right? It's an optional. And it also makes versioning of CI and CD really easy because you can pin versions of .NET and .NET MAUI with that. Now, like I said, every version here, and I'll talk about the cadence, is basically the same quality level metrics between 7, 8, and 9. So .NET 6 was an LTS or long-term support, and .NET 7 is a current. So current, LTS, current. The only difference is the support life cycle. So either 18 months or 3 years for it. Now, what's interesting though, is that we have these external dependencies of Xcode and Android APIs, which means that .NET MAUI will continue to receive patches for an additional 6 months after that. So what that means is traditionally in the world of .NET and this version, you wouldn't introduce iOS 17 support into .NET 6. But in the world of these dependencies, the team is going to do that afterwards. So they'll continue to patch major versions after the successor. So you'll continue to get new patches of .NET MAUI, which will include new versions of iOS or Android. So what this means for you as a developer is if you're targeting .NET 6, you'll continue to get 18 months of patches that will include new versions of iOS or Android. So you can think of it pretty much as, how long do I have to go from .NET 7 to .NET 8? Well, basically, 18 months, and I guess there's previews there, so it's kind of 6 months after. But that doesn't mean that you won't get security patches or other things like that, because that will fall into the 3-year support cycle. So it really is how fast do you need to adopt new versions of iOS or Android. So if you're at a company where you're like, hey, I don't need to do that, and as long as my app keeps running, you'll have that traditional 18-month or 3-year life cycle for security patches and things like that. But as far as operating system patches, you'll get 18 months in general. It seems like quite complicated, but we haven't shipped .NET 7 yet, so we'll figure it out as we go. Now, if you're a Xamarin developer, I think the difference is you basically always had to be updated. You didn't really have a choice, right? Because when Visual Studio updated, your version of Xamarin updated, and you were just in automatically. So what this means is that you now have a choice to continue to build and ship with .NET 6 or .NET 7 or .NET 8, even with new versions of Visual Studio or different versions that come out. You can pin it, they'll be supported, they'll be easy to version. At the end of the day, that's kind of what it means. Now, finally, though, if you are building with Xamarin today, whether it be Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android, Xamarin Mac, or Xamarin Forms, which are built on top of that, you have until the end of May 2024, which is the end of support. So there are new versions of Xamarin iOS, Xamarin Android coming out, and new patches to Xamarin Forms for critical bug fixes. But as far as new feature work being done, that's not being done at all, obviously. So it's sort of in that maintenance mode. But if, let's say, iOS 17 comes out and something is broken, the team will fix that. You know what I mean? They'll get it done. And that's quite a long time. So that means we all have a year and a half. That's good. All right, let's talk about getting .NET 7 bits and pieces. So it actually is out today. So you can do it, and I have it here on my machine. And you can run .NET 6 and .NET 7 side by side, and you can pin versions. It should just work accordingly. The easiest way to acquire it is just to actually install the preview version of Visual Studio 2022 on either Windows or the Mac. It's the only version I run ever in general. And when you do that, it'll install .NET 7. It's the first version of Visual Studio that installs .NET 7 automatically. There's a checkbox for it. But when you go to create a .NET MAUI app, you now have this choice, basically, the .NET 6 LTS, long-term support, or .NET 7 preview. And inside of there, once .NET 7 ships, it'll just say current release. So that'll be the only difference there. Now, under the hood, the actual only difference is this in the project. Everything is the same. So the project, everything that you create is the same. The only difference is the versioning of these target framework monikers. We call them TFMs, if you will, and they say they're target frameworks. So inside the project, since we multi-target, what you'll see is that you just flip it to .NET 7. So actually upgrading from .NET 6 to .NET 7, as long as you have .NET 7 installed on your machine, is to change it from a 6 to a 7, because there's no breaking changes. Even though it is a major version, Simvert doesn't really apply in this case, and that would be a lowercase net, not capital net, but there's that PowerPoint auto-correcting there. And the same would be true. There's actually .NET 7 Mac and Mac Catalyst. So if you're doing just Mac work in general, it's supported there. Now, this applies to not only .NET MAUI, but if you have a just Xamarin iOS or Xamarin Android application, you'll want to move that to .NET 6 or .NET 7 too, because those Xamarin iOS and Xamarin Android projects that don't use Xamarin Forms are still in that end of life for 2024. And your migration will be extremely easy because there's a upgrade assistant tool that'll migrate your CS project for you. And it's mostly about if the ecosystem of NuGet packages are supported or out there. But I think this is really cool because this is going to enable developers to really pin their versions of .NET to whatever they want. So that's how we upgrade. Now, there's a bunch of new stuff. Look at that light bulb. Thanks, PowerPoint, for adding a light bulb there. What's new? I would say in .NET 7, I sort of called it like the reintroduction of .NET MAUI, and that's a James thing. It's not an official thing, but I sort of think it is because it really is the finalization of the IDE support, but also adding a lot of really big performance improvements, desktop improvements, and getting that original feedback from developers for quality and reliability improvements. And also adding features that were in Xamarin Forms that hadn't made it to the GA of .NET MAUI, specifically maps, which a lot of people use, and dual screen support as well for any foldable devices. Microsoft works very close with Samsung and other manufacturers, including our Surface Duo team. So performance, I'll talk there before I talk about new APIs. So this would be our startup time improvement between just a Xamarin Forms application and a .NET MAUI application with .NET 7. I did have the .NET 6 one there, and it was just a little bit higher. So, you know, the normal startup time, this is sort of with AOT and all of the things on there, and this is an Android application that's being modeled here, is about a 53% reduction in startup time of applications on average. And that's, of course, using some of our new AOT and profiling that's on our applications. So this is sort of just out of the box, pre-default settings between the two projects there. And like I said, I think between .NET 6 and .NET 7, this was kind of like 50 and 53. So shaving off at this point, little things. But another performance metric that the team also looks at, they call it the lulls test, which is how many times can you create a new control on the screen that says lull or laugh out loud over and over again. Now, this is not a test that the team created. It's a test that someone in the Flutter community created to show the Flutter performance of a word being rendered over and over and over again. Flutter is unique because it's a canvas, right? They're not creating the native controls. It's sort of like a game engine in a way. So I'm not gonna say that's cheating, but it's different. They're not apples to apples, if you will. Jonathan Peppers, who works on the Android and .NET MAUI team, he has a repo that's called lull, and he does snapshots with every release. He has it with, hey, I'm a .NET MAUI developer, out of the box, this is what it looks like. And there's a button that just creates a bunch of lulls on screen. He has one with normal controls, and then he has one that emulates Flutter. And the one that emulates Flutter is actually 4 times more lulls than Flutter. But that's not what you're going to use on a day-to-day basis. You're going to render the native controls. So in .NET 6, the team spent a lot of time trying to make more lulls on the screen for some reason, and they rotate and they do all this stuff. So lots of lulling happening, lots of laughing out loud. But in Xamarin Forms, I think we think about performance. There's how fast is it, then how is it just when I'm using the application. Is this a valid use case? I don't know, maybe, but at least it's something that we can snapshot on a physical device. So I think what's nice here is you see a gradual bar up and to the right, because higher is better. You want more of these things on the screen. So with Xamarin Forms, it was capped out at about 200. That's just like where it could go. And then with .NET 6, it increased, nearly doubled it to about 320. And now we're at almost 500. So this is a 275% increase of lulling from Xamarin Forms, and even 51% increase over .NET 6, which is quite impressive, because that gap is quite substantial, right? So the higher this bar gets, even if this is smaller, it's a lot higher number in general there. So performance is one of the key optimizations that the team looks at, and specifically on Android, because Android's complex.
Could you explain how this test works? Because there's a number of laws, like 500 of laws. So what's the problem here? Is it like the render problem or the time?
It's the rendering problem of how many lulls it can render in a tight loop every second. So this is being able to generate the number of new controls in an amount of every second, basically.
While trying to maintain a constant frame rate?
That's correct. Yeah. Yes. Yeah. In general. So basically what it would do is it would do a tight loop of creating and rendering lulls, and it would reset that loop every second, basically, on it and generate that. Doing a stable frame rate. Yeah. And again, this was a Flutter one. I should have put the URL, but Jonathan Peppers, he did a blog post on performance on the .NET MAUI blog, and you can read a lot more in that. But yeah, that's the thing. So if you were creating a game or doing animations, for example, and moving lots of different particles on the screen, this would be quite important in general. So like a little confetti thing or something like that. So yeah. Oh, so there's maps is one of the biggest features I would say added in .NET 7. So maps got a complete overhaul. I would say they're much better. So not only can you put a pin on the map, you can also customize pins and a lot more. But the API is almost kind of the same as far as creating a location, map spans, pins. But I think what's more important is that they thought about some of the other things that developers are going to want to do with maps, and specifically doing all sorts of geometry on top of maps as well. So this is a great blog post from Andre, I think it's MVP, I want to say, where you can just kind of do a lot of things with maps. So I think this was different districts or something where he lives. And what's cool about this API is that it's just sort of just polygons and coordinates here. So these are parking zones. So in this instance, he was going and pulling down a big JSON feed and then parsing out different geometry in these features. So there's polygons, and you can have stroke colors and fill colors, geopaths that you can create. So you can kind of really add a bunch of complexity into these things, and it still uses the native maps at the end of the day. So Google Maps and Apple Maps in general. Right now, the Maps API doesn't work on Windows just because the Maps control is not part of the Windows app SDK yet. So the team is working on just a web view for Windows. That'll be part of the community toolkit for .NET MAUI. That should launch probably around .NET 7 timeframe. They've already spec'd that out. But there is an awesome community SDK called Maps UI, or Maps UI, I like to call it. That works on, I think, Mapbox or whatever the open source mapping is. So if you do want to look for other maps out there, there's a pretty great ecosystem already. Cool. Beyond just maps, I think the real biggest enhancement is probably desktop enhancements in .NET 7. So inside of here, developers have been asking for a lot more things. With .NET MAUI, we got multi-window support, which is not only great for like iPads and bigger tablets, but obviously really important for desktop. to have multiple windows. So every .NET MAUI app now has a window. It's just generated for you. You can spin up new windows all the time. Now, with this version in .NET 7, the team surveyed developers building desktop applications. They said, we really want everyone to be using .NET MAUI to build desktop apps out of the box. So what do you need? And what were your biggest features? So it was context menu, tooltips, pointer gestures, and also window sizing and positioning was one of the most important part for any window. So those are all added in, and I'll kind of talk, and I'll show some demos here of doing that in general. But it also plays into some of the other enhancements besides the windowing is the menuing system that they added to .NET MAUI that was brand new. And I'll show that off as well, because it's actually one of my favorite features that no one talks about there. And the final part, I think in general, it's not really necessarily .NET 7 related, but there have been enhancements under the hood for it, is really ensuring that developers have not only the reach, but also the depth. And when I think of these things, I think of reach, of being able to run a .NET application anywhere. I think of the web, right? When I think of wanting to hit every single device humanly possible, then I want to build applications that can be on the web, whether they're running on the server and a progressive web app, they're running offline. And Blazor is our web framework to build those types of applications that gives you maximum reach, because it's a web app that can be everywhere. But at the same time, having reach doesn't mean you have depth. And depth really means taking advantage of those native capabilities, deploying into the App Store, into my internal application store. And that's really where I think .NET MAUI fills in the gaps there. Being able to access those device capabilities, build those world-class applications, ship them everywhere. But additionally, I think as .NET developers, we should have the option to blend those pieces of technology. So giving the best of reach and the best of depth. In .NET 6 and in .NET 7 with .NET MAUI is Blazor Hybrid, which is Blazor plus .NET MAUI. And Blazor Hybrid is actually has multiple options as its backend. So not only .NET MAUI to create iOS, Android, Mac, and Windows apps, but also Blazor Hybrid works in WinForms and WPF applications as well. So you can bring and share code from the web into .NET MAUI applications and run them inside of a native shell. So to me, I think this is why we see an even larger explosion of .NET MAUI developers, because there are millions of web developers and ASP.NET Core developers that now can bring and share their web skills and build applications and mix and match UI as they want, which is quite cool. So let's take a look at some of this stuff here in action. So I'll sit down. I'll try to move over to the side here. Cool. All right. So inside this GitHub repo is all of our .NET MAUI samples. It's github.com/.NET/MAUI is .NET MAUI, and MAUI-samples is MAUI samples. And they're there. And you'll see a bunch of stuff. So I, changed a few things around in general. But these are a few projects that are in it. So I'm going to run this context menu one. I said this is sort of like the desktop one in general. So as we can see inside of here, the only thing that we've changed is the .NET 7 capabilities there. So that's how you're going to turn it on in general. And you can see if you have things installed, if you open up here, you should be able to do .NET, I don't know, what was it? .NET info, there we go. Yeah, so you can see on my machine here, I have all the .NETs installed. So I have currently .NET 7 is my default, but I have .NET 6 and .NET 7 RC1 installed. Then if I do .NET workload list, yep, there we go. So I do .NET workload list on here. It's a little bit weird because a little bit of a lag. It's kind of funny. We can see what I have installed as workloads. So we have Android, iOS, and then all the MAUI stuff here. And you can see specifically the versions of it. So this is kind of interesting. The version, there's manifest versions, and 33 is saying that this is being built against Android API 33, and the version of the .NET SDK is .NET 7 RC1. And the same thing here for Mac Catalyst is 15.4, and iOS is 15.4 as well. Now there is a newer version that this would flip to 16 because we just finalized support for iOS 16 in both .NET MAUI and in Xamarin iOS. So I'm not going to update a bunch of stuff before I give talks and keynotes, but it's here and it all works just fine. And then also this is kind of cool. This will tell you who installed it. So you can see who's kind of managing your workload. And this is probably actually the most confusing part for me is when I run .NET, it's running this command under the version of .NET that is my default. And this is really confusing because technically the .NET command line that I'm running is the .NET 7 command line. If I wanted to install .NET 6 stuff, I'd actually have to go like navigate to a folder and put a global JSON that pinned to .NET 6. I'm not a command line person, so this is all really confusing to me, and it may be to you too. So that's how you can have multiple versions of the things installed, because if you're coming from the Xamarin world, this is basically impossible. So when you think of the engineering work just to do that, it's actually quite impressive. Not to mention that you can install multiple versions of Visual Studio for Mac side by side, which is bananas. You don't even want to know about the work that went into that. Cool. So I'm just going to run this on Windows because this is kind of this context menu sample that I want to just kind of show. And this is kind of a show and tell. I'm not going to really live code too much, but a little bit. I'll kind of show it off. Is inside the main page of this application, if it wants to boot up, come on Zoom, don't use all my resources. There we go. Cool. So this is a tiny application that I had a screenshot of that says add command. So a few things you'll see is that when I hover over this here, I see right click for options, and I can actually increase or decrease the fonts of the things I type in here. So I say hello world. I guess I need to type hello world. There we go. I can then right click increase, decrease fonts using right click options. These are the context menus that are in there. I can also clear it out, which is really cool. And the same thing as well, if I hover over this button, I can add this little tooltip indicator letting me know what it is. And I think that tooltip is great because to me, it's almost like an informational bubble, almost like an accessibility feature in a way. In addition to the normal accessibility features that would be like screen readers support in there, which is cool. I also have these these kind of like menu options up here. And these are new in just .NET MAUI version 6. You might not even know that they existed. They only show up on Mac and Windows. And on Mac, they would show up on the top bar. But if you're on an iPad, it'll actually be keyboard shortcuts too, which is kind of crazy. Cool. So the APIs are really elegant. If I actually just show you that button, all there is tooltip properties, and there's .text, which is nice. And of course, you can bind that to a string translation in your resx files and things like that. And it pairs pretty nice to the semantic properties. So the reason they're different properties is because semantic properties are the screen reader support. You might want to set different level headings. You might want it to say something different compared to the tooltip because it's screen reader. It should be more verbose in general. But on any single control, you can add a tooltip property and you get a tooltip, easy peasy. For the context menus, which is this, I really like this API too. Inside of any control, there's this new thing called flyout base. Now, I don't actually know why it's called flyout base in general. I'd have to ask the team. I assume because they want to fly out other things at some point, fly things out from the top or from the bottom. I don't know. But there's a thing called flyout base, and there's a context flyout. I guess that kind of makes some sense. It's flying out of the right click in general, but it's more than a right click because that context might be different on different operating systems. And this gives them some flexibility. But what you can do here is you can just create a flyout menu flyout, and give it menu flyout items inside of here. So you can have as many as you want. There's menu flyout, and there's separators and sub items as well. So if I put this in here and I come in, we can actually see here, see that little separator, it's tiny right there. That's kind of cool, which is quite nice. And then ideally what you should be able to do is do a menu flyout. How do you do it? Sub item. I think it's the same as, yes, perfect. Nice, that makes sense. So there's flyout sub item. And then this one would be like text. This one has items. And then you could, copy and paste multiple items in here. So now we have this one here. And when I right click, you now have this kind of flyout thing, which is kind of nice in general. So it's complex. Now I know why they called it this, is because it's the same API as the one up here, as these menu items. So the menu items up top are on the page, and those are the ones that are up here. So you can actually see that here on the file, the locations, and the views. So there's the menu bar items, which have flyout items. That's why they called it that. That team is very clever in general. So what's nice is that you can obviously create these like on demand, and you can do whatever you want. And there's also, menu flyout separators on here too. So you can have that same exact separator that you can see. It's pretty delayed. Is it doing it? There we go. You can see that little tiny separator that's happening right there on that. And obviously I'm in a light screen mode here, which is kind of cool in general. So that's really cool. Now, one thing that I don't like about this application is the size. So inside of the app, we standardize on app shell. That was me. So if you don't like app shell, you can blame me. I made the templates and I forced the team to make it the way. I think it's the way. So that is a James thing in general. So there's this override that was added inside of .NET MAUI, which is called create window. And this gets called whenever a window is created. Now you can just create windows as well on the shell or in the app, I should say. You can create new windows. So every time you create one, you've got your application that gets called. And by default, it's just calling the base class and returning it. So you don't need to override this. It does it for you automatically. However, in the newer versions, .NET 7, there's new properties that the team added onto it here. So they added specifically 6 different properties, I should say. One is XY. So where is it on the screen? This is only when it's created. You could, of course, change this on demand. So if you wanted to pin things. And then there's also minimum and maximum. So if you wanted things to be really small, you could set minimum and maximum. That's how you would pin it to a specific size. And then here, I'm going to use a built-in API of .NET MAUI, which comes from Essentials, to get the display info. And then I'll just go ahead and center it in the middle in general. So we can run this again. And this ideally now should create the window. And here I'm just saying if on desktop, and I could say if it's on desktop or Windows only, I could do different things. This should, that didn't work. Why didn't that work? Question mark, let's see. Oh, I don't know why my machine is saying it's on tablet. That seems incorrect. So let's go ahead and just remove that. I don't know if that hot reload is going to work. Probably not. Try it again. That's weird. That's good to know. Let's try this again. Cool. Oh, yeah, there we go. Perfect. Now, I don't know why it's not centering it in the middle of the screen. Oh, I think because that's not supported on WinUI 3 yet. That's why. So there's some things that are supported on WinUI 3 and Mac separately, so it's a little bit funky in general. So kind of be aware of that in this. So I'm pretty sure there's some documentation I have, but now you can see that I can't make it bigger or smaller on there. But I do like this. This is a feature that I always wanted, because if I did want like 1920 by 1080, now I could say it could be the full of the screen or not in general. I don't know why I thought the X and Y would work, but maybe it doesn't in Windows in general. There's a weird like, oh, that's probably why. It's because for some reason, maybe that's not working. There must be something weird with my current screen resolution thing. Well, let's just try this. Let's just try like, well, I know what the middle is, but let's just do like 400, 400. Let's just see if that works. Good old code. I assume it has something weird with something is happening, but is the life of a release candidate. So ideally, this should start somewhere then, in general. Okay, I don't know what's happening. Now it's just being weird. Oh, okay, no, this makes sense. Perfect. Awesome. This makes sense why it's bigger, because this is like the default. But what I can see is I can only make it so small, 400 by 400, and then I could make it bigger. So you can kind of have that control. I guess a better example of this would have been to do like 800 by 800, and then go ahead and show this off as well. See if this works. There we go. So now we can kind of see it's not as big because it's at that max 800 by 800, and I can, or whatever the resolution is for it, and I can only go so big, I guess, in general, that it's going to allow me to go. So you just have more granular control over it. I think at some point Windows probably forces something. So I am trying to snap it, but it won't let me go the max height, right? So it's only 1920 by 1080 and whatever this is. So it's kind of like having that issue there, kind of giving me that in general. So you kind of have more control over it in general. Now beyond that, like I said, since there's not anything crazy new in general, the maps here, like I said, work on pretty much everything, but this is the sample from that I had earlier. So if I go over here, I have my map control. If I look in the code behind over here, we're able to go into the application, add pins, as many as you want. I showed you kind of the more advanced things that you can do. Now, if I come into this application and start it on Android, the only thing I need to do is I need to still register this application in my Android manifest. I'm not going to open it because there's an API key in it and this is being recorded. So you still need to register for Android to do that specifically. So that's all the same in general. And I'm probably not going to blow people's minds, but there's literally going to be an app with a map and a pin on it. So ideally here we have, this one is just focusing in on Maui here. But I think if I zoomed all the way out, I think Gerald wrote this sample, so he probably put himself somewhere. If I zoom way out in general, let's see. There he is over there. So there's there. Now the same thing should be true on iOS, only because I want to just really test this out. Let's see, I did plug in my phone. I haven't tested on iOS yet, so let's test it on iOS. And let's deploy it to my iPhone, and let's see if it works. So we're going to use hot restart. So this is a feature that kind of came out at the end of .NET MAUI or Xamarin Forms, but is part of .NET MAUI. So here it's just I've added my iOS account and information to Visual Studio and plugged my iPhone into my device. And if this is all working correctly, this should work. So this should create my app inside of an app, basically. So this creates, you never use hot restart, it enables you to deploy to your iOS device without a Mac. Obviously, I don't have a Mac here. And what it does is it takes your app source code, uses our interpreter, and it interprets your source code inside of an app shell, not a .NET MAUI app shell, but a shell of an app that's been signed accordingly to work, and then deploys it onto the device. And this one is not good. Let's try one more time. It should work. Let's see. It should work. I haven't tested with .NET 7 yet. So if it doesn't work, then I'm not gonna be able to show this demo, but oh, did it work? Fingers crossed. Oh my gosh, it did work. Amazing. When in doubt, just redeploy it again. Cool. So you do need a newer iPhone, older iPhones if you have an older test device. There's a lot of like things happening, and older devices aren't fast enough to run hot restart. Mine's barely. It's an iPhone SE 2, but look at that. It's a map and it's there. That's cool. I guess that's cool. And the other thing that's cool about this is I'm using Blazor to screen mirror this, which is one of my favorite apps to screen mirror iOS and Android. But technically it works with our XAML hot restart, or sorry, XAML live preview. So you can actually get this inside of Visual Studio. In general, it actually works on a device or on emulator that enables you to do a bunch of stuff. So, that's pretty cool in general. So if you've never seen that, you're like, wow, that's not .NET 7 related, but it's cool that it works in general. So that's it. That's all I got, because there's not that much, but hopefully you've seen there's some new support. I didn't show everything today, so I talked a lot about quality and reliability. There is some more stuff with maps that you can do in dual screen support as well. And all the samples are on the GitHub repo. That's it.